This birth mother, who was even crueler than a stepmother, actually demanded that her own daughter, who could no longer walk, donate her heart to save her son. When Yu Pinyang woke up and saw his sister, Yu Xiong, lying unconscious in front of him, he fell to his knees beside her hospital bed. Choking back tears, he whispered, "Silly sister, why did you agree to give me your heart? Promise me, in the next life, don't be so soft-hearted and kind." Hearing those words, a tear slipped from the corner of Yu Xiong's eye, landing on the cover of a novel beside her pillow titled How to Conquer a Dominant CEO. In the next moment, Yu Xiong felt herself falling into a dark abyss, her mind filled with the sound of pages turning and scenes flashing by. To her shock, they were scenes from a novel she had read before. Suddenly, a little girl opened her eyes wide. It was Yu Xiong, reborn. She slowly sat up and looked around. The room was decorated in an ancient style, elegant and traditional. She glanced down and, to her surprise, realized her body had become smaller. Suddenly, Yu Xiong's head throbbed with pain, and memories that weren't hers came flooding in. She felt the sharp pain of a knife slashing into her leg. Instinctively, she pulled back the blanket covering her and saw bandages around her knee, with faint traces of blood seeping through. Yu Xiong broke out in a cold sweat. "Oh crap, this is exactly like the plot from that novel I never finished reading. And now, I've somehow become the cannon fodder side character with the same name, who is also crippled." According to the book's plot, when the real female lead returns, this fake lead, herself, would meet a tragic end. No way, she thought, stay calm. The last life was already tough enough. Even if I'm stuck in this story, I'll find a way to live well this time. She quickly recalled the details of the novel, wondering who she could rely on in this unfamiliar household. Yu Xiong knew she couldn't count on her mother, Madame Lin, who only cared about her deceased husband and paid no attention to her own son, let alone a hot-tempered daughter like Yu Xiong. The grandmother and the matriarch of the family were also heavily biased in favor of the legitimate lineage. Even if Yu Xiong managed to win them over, her position would always be weaker compared to their biological granddaughter. However, her eldest brother, Yu Pinyang, who had inherited his father's title at a young age, seemed to have a promising future. Besides, according to the novel's plot, she had just taken a knife for him. While Yu Xiong was lost in thought, a maid's voice came from outside, announcing that Miss Yusiu was here to visit. Yusiu, her so-called elder sister, was known in the novel as a two-faced green tea character. She was always sweet on the surface, but ready to stab Yu Xiong in the back. This visit was likely to have bad intentions. Yusiu entered the room and said, "Sister, are you feeling any better today? Have you taken your medicine?" She appeared concerned, saying, "Seeing your injury really breaks my heart." But inside, she thought, this fool doesn't even know her legs will never heal. When I tell her this, she'll surely start cursing and make a scene in front of grandmother. Then let's see how she continues to throw her weight around with her legitimate daughter status. At that moment, Yu Xiong noticed a figure standing outside the door. In the novel, this was Yu Pinyang, who had overheard her heated exchange with Yu Xiu, where Yu Xiong, provoked, had lost her temper and cursed at her brother. This had erased the last bit of guilt Yu Pinyang felt for his sister, leaving her completely isolated. But the Yu Xiong of today was no longer the same as the one from the novel. Instead of being provoked, she even cried while speaking up for Yu Pinyang, "He is my brother, and I chose to take the knife for him willingly. My brother is the mainstay of the Yongle Marquis mansion. Without him, our uncles would have already plotted against us for the title. My legs being crippled doesn't matter, but nothing can happen to him." These words deeply moved Yu Pinyang, who was standing outside the window. Originally, he had felt a little guilty toward Yu Xiong, and now he genuinely began to recognize her as his true sister. However, Yu Xiong didn't stop there. She deliberately exposed Yu Xiu, saying, "The day I returned injured, didn't you look very happy, sister? You kept saying, 'Serves her right, serves her right.' Let's see how arrogant she can be now." Yu Xiu was startled and afraid. "How did you know?" "I didn't expect you to have a spy around me, you're really cunning," she snapped. Yu Xiong, looking hurt, replied, "Sister, I've always been sincere to you. Whenever I have something good, I think of you. When you got into trouble, I took the blame for you. So, why do you resent me so much? Yusu's shock quickly turned into rage. Well, since you know everything, I won't pretend anymore. You've been the legitimate daughter of the Marquis mansion since you were born, having everything handed to you. How would you ever understand the hardships of being a concubine-born daughter? But guess what? Your days of glory are almost over. Do you know that you're nothing but a wild child picked up from who knows where? Just as she finished speaking, someone outside burst through the door and shouted, "Nonsense!" It was Yu Pinyang who had come in, and Yu Xiong's eyes filled with tears. Isn't this my brother? She wondered. Yu Pinyang immediately embraced her, saying, Yu Xiong, don't be afraid. Your brother will protect you. Yu Xiong was stunned. He looked so much like the brother from her past life. She instinctively wanted to reach out and touch his face but stopped herself. He wasn't the same her brother, just someone who resembled him. Feeling even more sorrowful, she thought she'd never see her loving brother again. But Yu Pinyang pulled her into his arms, gently patting and comforting her just like the brother from her past life. Yu Xiong couldn't help but grab onto her brother's clothes tightly with her small hands. Even though she knew this wasn't the brother from her past life, at this moment, she felt the same warmth as she once did. Feeling safe in his embrace, Yu Xiong slowly drifted off to sleep. Yu Pinyang gently wiped away her tears, silently vowing to himself, since you were willing to take a knife for me and see me as a brother worth sacrificing for, I will cherish and protect you as my own sister, regardless of your name or origin. This will never change. After carefully placing Yu Xiong on the bed and making sure she was comfortable, Yu Pinyang turned around, his gaze fierce, and said to Yusu, come with me. With an authoritative expression, he demanded, how did you find out about Yu Xiong's background? And who else have you told? Yusu trembled with fear and stammered, I overheard it the day I went to greet grandmother. I only told a few people, Nanny Zhu and Huan Bai. Upon hearing this, Yu Pinyang immediately ordered his servants to take Nanny Zhu and Huan Bai away to be severely punished. The two maids were terrified and begged for mercy on their knees. Yusu, looking distressed, questioned with a pleading face, Big brother, are you really going to punish them just for the sake of that wild child? Yu Pinyang, his eyes filled with murderous intent, replied, she is my legitimate sister, Yu Pinyang's true sister. Anyone who dares to speak nonsense again will have to face the consequences. I will only say this once. If you make trouble again, I will hand you over to grandmother. But Yusu showed no fear. Hand me over to grandmother? Fine, I'll go to mother right now and plead my case. Mother despises that wild child as much as I do and will certainly support me. She rushed to her mother's side, knelt down, and exaggerated the situation, adding details to make herself look pitiable. Madame Lin was instantly furious, slamming the table and shouting, how dare he not recognize his own sister and instead treat a wild child as family. Taking advantage of her mother's anger, Yusu continued to fan the flames. Mother, don't be upset. That wild child must have used some sweet words to confuse brother. Hearing this, Madame Lin became even angrier and declared, a wild child dares to take over the nest and act this way. If I don't drive her out today, I'm not the mistress of this household. Yu Xiong slowly drifted off to sleep in her brother's warm embrace. The next day, the pain in her injured leg woke her up. She sat up and called for someone, but there was no one around. It took several minutes before a maid, casually munching on sunflower seeds, strolled in with no sense of urgency. Looking exhausted, Yu Xiong picked up a teacup and told the maid, my leg hurts terribly. Go fetch the doctor immediately. But the maid, clearly annoyed, tossed away her sunflower seeds and said, all the doctors in the house are with the old madam right now. We servants don't dare to disturb them. Besides, it's not like your leg will heal anytime soon, so just be patient and don't make things difficult for us. The more Yu Xiong listened, the more irritated she became. She picked up the tea she had been about to drink and splashed it directly onto the maid's face, her eyes flashing with anger. Watch your words, she snapped. At that moment, Yu Pinyang appeared and asked what had happened, startling the maid. Yu Xiong, feeling weak, just looked on. The maid immediately fell to the floor, crying and begging for the Marquis' forgiveness, saying, "It's my fault, I didn't serve the young miss properly and made her angry." But Yu Pinyang wasn't interested in listening to the maid's excuses. His face was stern as he said, "Didn't you hear that the young miss is in pain? Why haven't you called the doctor yet? Next time you neglect her orders, I'll personally see to it that you're dealt with." Terrified by his words, the maid dropped to her knees, frantically kowtowing, "Please, Marquis, spare me. I won't dare to disobey again." After reprimanding the maid, Yu Pinyang turned to Yu Xiong, his face filled with concern. "Does it hurt a lot, Yu Xiong? Don't worry, I'm right here with you, and the doctor will be here soon." He gently picked her up, and once again, Yu Xiong felt the warmth of her brother's love, tears welling up in her eyes. After seeing the doctor, Yu Pinyang brought over the freshly brewed medicine and sat by her bedside, gently coaxing, "Be a good girl, Yu Xiong, drink this up quickly. It'll help your leg feel better soon." Yu Xiong took the medicine, thinking to herself that she had been taking medicine every day in her previous life, and here she was, unable to escape it again. She drank it down in large gulps, but immediately grimaced in discomfort, exclaiming that it was unbearably bitter. Without missing a beat, Yu Pinyang slipped a candidate from the western regions into her mouth, a doting expression on his face. "I brought these specially for you. Is it still bitter now?" he asked. Yu Xiong's face lit up with happiness. Although he wasn't her biological brother, he treated her with the same genuine kindness as one. Suddenly, a guard appeared at the door and announced, "Young Marquis, the old madam has sent for you. She has something to ask, and your mother is there too." Yu Pinyang listened and thought to himself, "Mother is there as well? Could it be that Yu Xiu went to complain to mother about yesterday's punishment?" Yu Xiong, looking worried, seemed to guess that it might have something to do with her. Yu Pinyang quickly reassured her with a smile, gently patting her head, "Don't worry, little sister. With me here, nothing serious will happen. You just rest well. I'll be back soon." Before he left, Yu Xiong called out to him, "Brother, will you come see me again?" He replied without hesitation, "Of course. I'll come to keep you company every day." Yu Xiong's face beamed with joy as she said, "Really? Then let's make a pinky promise, you can't break it." Yu Pinyang smiled and immediately linked his pinky with hers, silently vowing to himself, "In this entire Marquis household, Yu Xiong only has me to rely on now. I swear I will protect you with my life." Meanwhile, Yu Xiu, furious after Yu Pinyang disciplined her personal maid, had rushed to their mother, Madame Lin, to complain. Adding fuel to the fire, Madame Lin flew into a rage, determined to drive this cuckoo in the nest out of the household. She then went to the old madam to complain, saying, "Mother, don't you think Pinyang has been bewitched by that misfortune bringer?" Madame Lin continued to argue, "He protects her like this, and the monk also said she's a calamity star, destined to bring misfortune to all relationships and cause death wherever she goes. Her fate is vicious. Ever since she arrived, the master passed away, and Pinyang's real sister has been left to suffer who knows what hardships among common folk. We can't keep such a bringer of disaster here." At that moment, Yu Pinyang entered the room. Seeing him, Madame Lin's anger flared up even more. "Pinyang, you're just in time. You must drive that illegitimate child out of the Marquis household today. Keeping such a calamity around will only bring harm to you. If not for her, you wouldn't have encountered those bandits." Yu Pinyang just chuckled coldly. "Mother, I will not send Yu Xiong away. Since she was willing to risk her life to save me, from now on, she is my true sister." Madame Lin's fury only grew at these words. That illegitimate child? A low-born merchant's blood, and she dares to compete for the status of my real daughter? Does she plan to continue bringing disaster to the Yu family? If you still consider me your mother, Pinyang, then immediately get rid of that calamity." Madame Lin shouted. The old madam sighed heavily, thinking to herself, "This Lin really has no grace befitting a matriarch." Yu Pinyang's only response was another cold laugh. Seeing her son's indifferent attitude, Madame Lin's heart pounded with anger, and she immediately began to wail. "Oh, what have I done to deserve this? Even my own son won't listen to me. If you both insist on protecting that illegitimate child, then I have no reason to live. If I die, I won't let her have peace either. I'll expose everything about that calamity so she won't be able to show her face in this household ever again." At that, the old madam slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "Stop right there. How can you be so foolish? Even now, you still can't see reason? How did I ever choose you to be the matron of this family? Have you even considered what the consequences would be if Yu Xiong's true identity were revealed?" Madame Lin, looking confused, asked, "Why would that matter?" The old madam stood up, her face filled with anger, and demanded, "Do you want everyone to know that your daughter was raised among lowly merchants and have that shame spread far and wide? If you want people to mock your daughter as some lowly pheasant trying to pass as a phoenix, someone who doesn't belong in high society, if you want her to never find a good marriage and live a miserable life, then go ahead and reveal everything. I won't stop you," the old madam continued, her voice sharp. Thankfully, Yu Xiong had a loving brother who cared for her. He had already informed their grandmother about Yu Xiong's situation in advance. Yu Xiong had said that even if she had to break her own legs, as long as her brother, the heart of the Yongle Marquis household, was safe, she would be happy. Hearing this brought great comfort to the old madam. If Yu Xiong truly felt this way, then it wasn't in vain that the family had raised her for 10 years. She could outshine the true-born daughter of the Yu family. So, when Madame Lin threw her tantrums, the old madam simply saw her as a foolish woman and warned her, "Do you realize what kind of impact revealing Yu Xiong's background would have on your own daughter's reputation?" Madame Lin, hearing this, looked regretful, tears welling up in her eyes. She had never thought that exposing Yu Xiong's identity would also ruin her own daughter's reputation, nearly causing a major disaster. Realizing her mistake, she quickly knelt down and asked the old madam, "Mother, your daughter-in-law has been foolish. What should we do now?" Sitting nearby and sipping his tea, Yu Pinyang shook his head in frustration, thinking, "Now you're worried? If I hadn't told grandmother about this in advance, who knows what kind of mess we'd be in?" The old madam, with a pained expression, sternly reminded Madame Lin, "Remember this, Lin. The Marquis household has twin daughters by birth. One was weak and frail, sent away to recover and cared for elsewhere, waiting to be brought back home. Both daughters came from your womb, none of them are illegitimate. You should understand how to handle things from here on out, right?" Madame Lin immediately bowed her head, tears streaming, and said, "I understand, mother. Please rest assured, I will make sure not a single word leaks out." Yu Pinyang, however, felt a deep sense of sadness and disappointment. Ever since his father passed away, it had been 10 years, and this was the first time his mother had shown such deep concern for someone else. But that person wasn't him. Instead, it was the sister who had been lost outside who became his mother's emotional support, while he, her own son, seemed to count for nothing. Maybe he was only slightly better than Yu Xiong. To cover up the fact that her true-born daughter's identity had been swapped, Madame Lin even planned to poison Yu Xiyu's personal maid and sell them off. When Yu Xiyu heard the news, she rushed to her mother's residence and demanded an explanation. What could they have possibly said to deserve being poisoned and sold? All my maids and servants are some of the most honest people you'll ever meet. They would never spread rumors or cause trouble for no reason, mother. Please, see the truth. Madame Lin responded with a hard slap. Honest people, you say? Listen to me, Yu Xiyu, she said, standing up with a face full of anger, you better forget everything you overheard at the Jing garden. If I hear even a whisper of it outside, no matter if you're a Yu family bloodline, I will poison you mute and send you off to the countryside. With that, she ordered the servants to take action without any hesitation. Yu Xiyu watched in horror as the poisoned maid lay unconscious before her, trembling with fear. Before leaving, Madame Lin didn't forget to threaten her again. You're already 12, right? Think carefully about whether you want to marry into a rich, powerful family or end up in a poor, shabby household. Yu Xiyu's face was filled with terror. Yu Xiong was an illegitimate child, so why was her mother, who clearly hated her deeply, still protecting her? Meanwhile, Yu Xiong was worried, wondering how Madame Lin felt about her after so long. Suddenly, a charm fell onto her face, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, feeling frustrated as she looked around the room full of talismans meant to ward off evil spirits. Annoyed, she called for her maid to remove them. The maid pleaded, "Miss, these are peace charms that Madame Lin had specially ordered for you. She warned us not to move them, or it could bring disaster." Yu Xiong's eyes flashed with anger. "Peace charms? Madame Lin really thinks highly of me," she scoffed. Just then, Yu Pinyang appeared and said to the maid, "If Miss says to remove them, then remove them. If Mother has any complaints, I will take responsibility." The maid, terrified, stammered, "Yes, yes, I will clean them up right away." Yu Xiong sweetly called out, "Brother," and both of them spoke in unison, asking each other questions, leaving them momentarily stunned. Yu Pinyang smiled warmly as he gently patted Yu Xiong's head. "There wasn't much going on with grandmother, so after a quick visit, I came to see you. She also asked me to tell you to get some good rest." Yu Xiong smiled in appreciation, feeling a sense of relief. It seemed she didn't have to worry about her true identity being exposed for now. As Yu Pinyang looked around her room, he was puzzled by how plain it was. "Why is your room so bare, Yu Xiong?" he asked. "It's clean, but it feels empty. Tomorrow, I'll have some gold and jade ornaments and other little trinkets sent over to keep you company." "How does that sound?" Yu Xiong quickly grabbed his sleeve to stop him. "Brother, there's no need to spend so much. The room was well decorated before, but most of the valuable items were borrowed by sister. I just want to get back what's mine. Could you help me with that?" Yu Xiong didn't want her brother to spend unnecessarily, she only wanted him to retrieve her belongings from their sister. Meanwhile, Yu Xiu was in her room, feeling frustrated. Butler Feng, on orders from the Marquis, came to reclaim the second Mrs. belongings. Yu Xiu looked through the account book, and when she finished, she was stunned. "What? These things were given to me. How can they just be taken back? Besides," she continued, "I am a legitimate daughter of the Marquis's household, so why should Yu Xiong, a mere illegitimate child, be allowed to keep the family treasures?" Butler Feng ignored her complaints. "I'm just following the Marquis's orders. Please don't make this difficult, miss." With that, Butler Feng ordered the servants to inventory everything in Yu Xiu's room. Soon, the room was nearly empty. Yu Xiu collapsed on the floor in anger, throwing the account book to the ground. "Everyone bullies me because I'm a concubine-born daughter, even my own brother favors that illegitimate child. I refuse to believe that even grandmother would side with her," she declared, preparing to seek grandmother's judgment. But Butler Feng blocked her path, sneering. "This is grandmother's decision. She warned that if you cause trouble and damage the family's reputation, your punishment might be far worse than being sent to a remote estate." With that, she picked up the account book and left Yu Xiu fuming. After dismissing the senior servant, Yu Xiu slumped to the ground, terrified as she remembered the maids who had been bitten by the poison, leaving her questioning her entire life. Butler Feng gathered all the gold, silver, jewels, and even the antique jade pieces from Yu Pinyang's collection, along with the wooden wheelchair that had been rushed by the carpenter overnight, and sent them all to Yu Xiong's quarters. The maids around her praised Yu Pinyang for his attentiveness, saying, "The Marquis is so thoughtful." Miss Yu Xiong only mentioned once that the room felt stuffy, and now he sent a wheelchair. Yu Xiong was overjoyed that something she mentioned offhandedly had actually been taken seriously. She thought to herself, "At least now I have some valuables with me. Even if the real female lead of the house comes back, I'll have something to fall back on." One of the maids, eyeing the gold and jewels with envy, hatched a greedy plan. "The Marquis is so generous, and all these treasures are just going to that crippled Yu Xiong? No way, I have to find a way to get some of that." Pretending to be helpful, she told Butler Feng, "You've worked hard delivering all this, madam. Let me take over from here and handle the rest." Butler Feng, unconcerned, replied, "Just make sure to keep everything safe and don't lose anything, so I can have peace of mind." As soon as butler phone left, the maid greedily eyed a large pearl, thinking, if I pawned this, I could easily get at least 100 silver taels. Without hesitation, she began altering the inventory records, thinking, Yu Xiong's just a fool who can't even read. Even if I take some of this stuff, she'll never know. Yu Xiong and another maid stood there, shocked. Is this girl out of her mind? Why is she openly changing the records? The maid, full of excitement, tried to play it off, saying, Miss, I've counted everything. You wouldn't understand the account book anyway, so let me hold on to it for you. But Yu Xiong quickly pulled the book out of the maid's hands and refused. No need, I'll keep the account book. I can use it to learn how to read with my brother later. The maid immediately started trembling in fear, realizing that if the Marquis saw the account book, her scheme would be exposed. She nervously took the book back and said, I'll just double-check everything. There's a lot of stuff here, and I don't want to make any mistakes. Yu Xiong smiled at the maid and said, Oh, really? Well, in that case, count everything again, but make sure to be thorough this time. And don't bother putting my brother's gifts in storage, just leave them all in my room. I like looking at them every day. The maid agreed immediately but looked worried as she turned away. This girl used to be so weak-minded, but now she's sharp. Did she figure something out? The other maid, seeing this and confused, asked, Miss, she's treating you so disrespectfully. Why are you keeping her around? Yu Xiong's eyes flashed with anger as she replied, Of course, she can't stay. But now isn't the right time. I'll deal with her once I've secured my position in this household. When you have the power to see the future, how would you use it? Feeling more secure now that she had some wealth, Yu Xiong finally managed to get a good night's sleep. But in her dreams, she suddenly found herself trapped in quicksand, unable to move. She watched as her brother Yu Pinyang and his entourage sped past in their carriage, completely ignoring her desperate cries for help. As they approached a dangerous cliff, a thunderstorm hit, causing a landslide that swept them into a raging river. Yu Xiong woke up in a panic, shouting for her brother, and sat up in bed, wiping tears from her eyes. It was just a dream. But how could it feel so real? Could it be related to that novel? I really should have finished reading it. Suddenly, a maid announced that the Marquis had arrived. Yu Xiong instantly brightened, exclaiming, Brother, you're here. But when she saw what he was wearing, she froze in shock. It was exactly what he had worn in her dream. Yu Pinyang noticed her stunned expression and affectionately patted her head. I'm about to leave on a mission with the Crown Prince. I came to say goodbye to you, Yu Xiong. Yu Xiong's mind raced. That dream was definitely from the novel's later plot. I have to stop him from going. Seeing his sister's silence, Yu Pinyang assumed she was worried about being left alone. Smiling gently, he reassured her, Yu Xiong, don't worry. Just focus on recovering while I'm away. If anything happens, go find Butler Feng. She'll take care of you. A guard called out from outside the door, letting Yu Pinyang know that the horses were ready. Just as Yu Pinyang was about to leave, Yu Xiong grabbed the hem of his robe and suddenly pretended to be in pain. My leg hurts so much. Yu Pinyang was immediately worried and asked what was wrong. He shouted for the guards to call a doctor and to send a message to the Crown Prince, saying he would be a little late. The doctor arrived quickly, but after examining her, he looked puzzled. This shouldn't be happening. Yu Pinyang, full of concern, thought Yu Xiong's old leg injury had flared up again. The doctor reassured him, there's nothing seriously wrong with her legs. She'll be fine. Yu Pinyang looked at Yu Xiong, who seemed a bit guilty, and started to understand what was going on. He sat down by her bed and asked softly, Yu Xiong, are you pretending to be sick? I'm just going on a mission, not leaving for good. Yu Xiong, still anxious, pleaded, Brother, maybe you shouldn't go today. Can't you leave tomorrow instead? Yu Pinyang gently pinched her cheek and asked why. Yu Xiong, hesitant but honest, finally admitted, I had a nightmare. Yu Pinyang smiled indulgently, silly Yu Xiong, dreams aren't real. But Yu Xiong shook her head firmly, no, brother, this was different. I saw you wearing these clothes, riding a horse, followed by many carriages and soldiers. You were on a narrow path, with a mountain on one side and a gorge with a raging river on the other. Suddenly, it started pouring rain. You all sped up, but as you rounded a bend, a landslide hit and buried the convoy. The rock smashed open the chests in the carriages, and all the silver ingots fell into the river, lost forever. Hearing her mention the silver ingots, Yu Pinyang was shocked. Yu Xiong, are you sure you saw silver ingots? Yu Xiong described the scene in detail, and Yu Pinyang began to think deeply. This trip indeed involved transporting 8 million taels of disaster relief funds, something only the emperor and the accompanying personnel knew about. This dream was definitely strange. Meanwhile, outside the door, a maid overheard their entire conversation. A nightmare? Who would believe that? You might be able to persuade the Marquis, but I doubt you can convince the old lady. Just because you had a nightmare, you want to delay the Marquis from helping the Crown Prince? If the old lady finds out, she'll surely make you suffer. So, she went off to tattle. Madame Lu arrived after hearing the commotion and saw Yu Xiong clinging to Yu Pinyang's sleeve, begging him to leave tomorrow instead. Their grandmother told Yu Xiong to stop making trouble and sternly ordered the maids to help her go to bed. Yu Pinyang stepped forward to explain, "Grandmother, Yu Xiong is just worried about me. She's still recovering, so please don't make it hard for her." The grandmother held up her hand to stop him, saying, "I know how important this task is for the Crown Prince. You should leave quickly and not waste any more time." As Yu Xiong saw her brother about to leave, she shouted, "Brother, if it starts raining heavily, stop immediately. Don't keep going, no matter what." Their grandmother, annoyed by Yu Xiong's outburst, glared at her. Yu Xiong finally quieted down. The grandmother, with a stern face, scolded her, "I thought after what you've been through, you would have grown up a bit. But it seems you're still the same. Your brother has important duties, and if anything goes wrong because of you, the Emperor and the Crown Prince will hold us all accountable. The entire Marquis household could suffer." Yu Xiong, feeling wronged, said, "Grandmother, I know I was wrong." The grandmother replied, "It's good that you know. Don't cause any more trouble in the future. Now go to bed, I'm leaving." However, the maid nearby was frustrated. What's with the old lady? She didn't even punish her. All talk, no action. After turning around, she started gossiping again. "Old madam, second Mrs. Dream was really strange. She actually said the Marquis would be swept away by a landslide." The grandmother immediately silenced her. "Don't ever bring up such unlucky talk again, or I'll have your tongue cut out." Such bad luck! Yu Xiong, secretly relieved, thought to herself, "Now, there's no way I can shake off this bad luck label." But after that, she was boiling with anger. That maid is really asking for trouble. But now isn't the time to deal with her. I just hope Yu Pinyang gets through this safely. Yu Pinyang rode quickly to meet up with the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince asked why he was delayed, and Yu Pinyang explained that Yu Xiong's old injury had flared up again. After some brief conversation, they set off together. Suddenly, the sky lit up with lightning, and thunder roared as rain started to pour down. A guard shouted, "If we go another 7 or 8 miles, there's a village where we can take shelter. Hurry up, everyone, move faster." But Yu Pinyang stopped. He remembered Yu Xiong's description of this place. It looked exactly like the mountain path Yu Xiong had described in her dream. Yu Xiong had never traveled far before, so how could she describe this scene so vividly, almost like she had seen it herself? Was it really just a dream? Then, he heard a soft rustling sound and turned to see stones tumbling down the mountain. The more he thought about it, the more he believed Yu Xiong's dream was real. He quickly chased after the Crown Prince and shouted, "Stop! We can't go any further, it's dangerous ahead." The Crown Prince heard the word "the danger" and asked, "What's going on? Is there an ambush ahead?" Yu Pinyang quickly explained, "No, it's not bandits. The rain is too heavy, we should wait until it stops before continuing." He pointed to the falling stones from the mountain and said, "Look, the rain is making the rocks unstable. If we get hit, it could be dangerous. The Minister of Revenue, standing nearby, looked impatient and said, "It's only 7 or 8 miles, just a short distance. How could anything happen? We're in the middle of a downpour, where can we hide? We should just hurry to the village and take shelter there." But Yu Pinyang decided to trust Yu Xiong's dream. "It's better to be safe than sorry. If we get hurt, that's one thing, but we can't risk the Crown Prince's safety. Plus, we're carrying 8 million taels of disaster relief grain. If the horses get spooked by the falling rocks and the carts tip over, the silver could fall into the gorge or the river. Who would be responsible for that? We need to be cautious." The Minister of Revenue still wanted to argue, but the Crown Prince quickly ordered everyone to stop. They set up camp in a safe, open area by the roadside and sent some guards to scout ahead and check if the road was safe to travel. The Minister of Revenue looked annoyed, thinking, the Crown Prince is capable, but he's way too cautious. It's just a short distance, what could go wrong? He doesn't listen to anyone, only to that young, inexperienced boy. Suddenly, a guard rushed back, shouting, "It's bad! The road ahead has collapsed." Everyone was shocked. The guard, still shaken, added, "If we hadn't pulled back in time, we wouldn't have made it out alive." Seeing the situation, the Minister of Revenue quickly started flattering the Crown Prince, saying how he must be blessed by the heavens to be so wise and protected. Yu Pinyang noticed this and thought about her dear sister, Yu Xiong. While the Crown Prince finally relaxed a little, thanks to Yu Pinyang's quick thinking, the disaster relief funds were saved, and he said that when they returned to the capital, the Crown Prince would report him success to the Emperor. Back at the mansion, Yu Xiong was so worried about Yu Pinyang's safety that she couldn't sleep all night. Early the next morning, their grandmother came to visit Yu Xiong. Yu Xiong immediately asked if there was any news about her brother. Seeing how anxious Yu Xiong was, her grandmother gently reassured her, saying, "Pinyang is fine, don't worry. I've received a letter from him." Relieved, Yu Xiong sighed, as long as he's okay. Her grandmother could tell that Yu Xiong hadn't slept at all, and though Yu Xiong wasn't a blood relative of the family, she had grown up with Yu Pinyang, and her love for him was genuine. With a kind smile, the grandmother patted Yu Xiong's head and said, "My dear, Pinyang mentioned in his letter that it was thanks to your warning that he avoided disaster. You're a true hero of our family." She then instructed Butler Feng to bring 100-year-old ginseng root for Yu Xiong to help her recover and also to fetch some precious silk. Yu Xiong was taken aback and said, "This is too much." But her grandmother reassured her, "In our family, we reward and punish fairly, and this is what you deserve. If it wasn't for your warning, Pinyang would have rushed ahead and could have lost her life. The disaster relief funds might have been lost too, and the family would have had to pay millions. Even if we sold everything, we wouldn't have been able to cover that." The ginseng that Butler Feng brought was indeed extraordinary, but Yu Xiong wasn't focused on that. She was just glad she had that dream and warned Yu Pinyang in time. Otherwise, all the blame would have fallen on her, and she would have been seen as bad luck. Nearby, a maid Sueshi started plotting again, thinking about how valuable the 100-year-old ginseng was since it was a royal gift that could save a life in a critical moment. Yu Xiong might have been disabled, but she somehow charmed the old lady into giving her such a valuable treasure. A maid stood up, saying she'd make soup for the second young lady, but she was really planning to sell the ginseng to a pharmacy and replace it with a cheap version for Yu Xiong. After all, she figured, Yu Xiong wouldn't even notice the difference. But Yu Xiong wasn't stupid. She stopped Sueshi and said, "Let Lo Yu handle the kitchen work. You should just move those boxes of Jiaoling sand into the storeroom." Sueshi was about to refuse, but when she saw the grandmother and granddaughter getting along so well, she had no choice but to agree. Sueshi struggled to move the heavy wooden boxes by herself, huffing and puffing all the way, cursing Yu Xiong under her breath, wondering how the old lady and the lord had been fooled by her. Suddenly, she spotted a peace talisman on the ground and got an idea. If she disclosed that Yu Xiong had thrown away the talisman that the lady of the house had prayed for, the old lady, who was strict about traditions, would surely punish Yu Xiong for disrespecting her elders. She sneaked back to Yu Xiong's room and listened in on their conversation. but Lafone was praising Yu Xiong for helping the Lord avoid 2 disasters in just a month. Hearing that, she interjected, saying that if Yu Xiong hadn't been blessed by someone powerful, the Bodhisattva wouldn't have given her a dream. Since the Lord was saved this time, it seems that the peace talismans your mother gave you are quite effective. Maybe you should hang them back up in your room, the maid suggested. Grandmother then asked sternly, did your mother send those talismans? But Yu Xiong warned the maid, didn't I tell you to burn all those talismans? The maid immediately knelt and pleaded, Miss, it's your mother's intention, and I couldn't bear to destroy them. With a serious look, grandmother demanded to know what was going on. Yu Xiong replied, Grandmother, you should see for yourself. Grandmother took the peace talisman from the maid, noticing how calm Yu Xiong appeared. The maid was puzzled, why wasn't Yu Xiong afraid? Could there be something wrong with this talisman? As grandmother examined it, her face turned red with anger. This wasn't a peace talisman, it was a curse. Furious, she slapped the maid hard across the face. Pointing at the cursed talisman, she yelled, You fool! How dare you secretly keep something so evil? What are you up to? She then ordered the guards to lock the maid in the woodshed. The maid cried and begged for mercy but was dragged away immediately. Grandmother was filled with regret, blaming herself for not paying attention. How could such dark magic be practiced in the prestigious Yongle Marquis household, and worse, against her own granddaughter? If word got out, the consequences would be unimaginable, especially considering the emperor's strict stance against such things. With a wave of her hand, grandmother ordered butler Feng to take some people and search Madame Lin's courtyard. Burn anything suspicious you find. If she causes trouble, send her back to her parents' house. I won't have her bringing disaster to our family, she added, reminding Yu Xiong to rest well and promising to resolve the matter. Yu Xiong nodded repeatedly, watching grandmother leave. She thought to herself that this unexpected turn of events had actually worked in her favor. Madame Lin wouldn't dare bother her for a while now. Butler Feng led the guards to Madame Lin's courtyard and instructed the servants to burn all the soul-calling banners and paper effigies. Madame Lin, unaware of the situation, rushed out to stop them, shouting, You wretched slaves, what do you think you're doing? Who gave you the nerve? Grandmother entered, holding the cursed talisman with a stern expression. I ordered them to burn it. How dare you bring such ominous things into our home? Aren't you afraid of getting the whole family executed? Look at what you've done. You're the real bringer of misfortune here. Madame Lin stubbornly insisted that the items were different and had been blessed by a powerful monk for her husband. But grandmother shoved her aside, saying, Junjie has been dead for 10 years. You've brought nothing but shame to this family as the head wife. If you keep this up, I'll have you divorced on Junjie's behalf, you fool. Madame Lin had no choice but to admit her mistake. After helping the crown prince with disaster relief, Yu Pinyang headed into the mountains to work on a farm. He was doing everything he could to convince a renowned doctor to come out of seclusion and treat his sister's leg condition. For half a month, he worked tirelessly, carrying water and digging up herbs. The doctor was puzzled by his determination. Was he really willing to do anything to help his sister? Yu Pinyang remembered how sweetly Yu Xiong would call him Big Brother. He thought, I'm her brother, of course I want to protect her and make sure she stays healthy and safe. If you agree to treat her, I'd do this work for half a year if I had to. The doctor, impressed by his dedication, finally agreed. All right, since you're so sincere, I'll treat your sister's leg. Overjoyed, Yu Pinyang threw his hoe aside. I need to send a letter to my sister right away and share this good news. Oh, and could you give me some of these herb seeds? My sister's stuck in a wheelchair, and tending to some plants might help her pass the time. Yu Pinyang pulled out some seeds from her clothes. The doctor took a look and was surprised to see they were ice jade dew seeds. He playfully poked Yu Pinyang with his fan, saying, You think these seeds are easy to grow, like cabbage? I've been trying to grow these for over 10 years and only managed to get one plant. And you think a little girl can do it? Yu Pinyang pleaded, It doesn't matter if they grow or not, I just want to give her something to look forward to. The doctor sighed and reluctantly agreed. Fine, take them. Meanwhile, Yu Xiong was watering flowers in the courtyard when a maid excitedly rushed in. Miss, the Marquis sent a letter. And he brought you something too. Yu Xiong, filled with hope, asked, My brother wrote? What did he say? The maid handed her the envelope and replied, The Marquis found a doctor who can cure your leg, and he sent you a bag of herb seeds to keep you busy when you're feeling down. Yu Xiong stared at the letter in disbelief. My brother really found a doctor who can heal my leg? The maid nodded eagerly. It's true. The old madam was so happy she sent me to tell you right away. Yu Xiong began to ponder deeply. 2 lifetimes spent in a wheelchair. Could my leg really be healed this time?